A Midwinter Night's Dream by Philip Wortmann. Drumming went the hooves upon the sudden frosting road. The steaming clouds that billowed both from horse and rider were like the signal of a smithy. The straining muscles of the beast that bore its harrow master hence were like the tendons of a tree, but lithe and lively with a dance of fleet flight. Black and threatening, like sails on a moonlit night, the cloak of the horseman rent and wove upon the winds, a spectral apparition. All about him fell the backdrop of a snowy heath, and, rare yet present, as are mountains in a plain, stood aged oaks and birch spinneys that creaked and shook like ancients in the wind. In their shadow hoved the wolves that plagued this land, and watched. Beyond these, the glittering, cold brine heaved and sighed with tidal boundedness upon the margin of the world. The distant sunlight dwindled on the brink of that westering sea, whence rose the place for which the rider strained his mount. There stood a bastion, a hillock crowned with jagged stone, yet jagged stone was crowned in turn with masonry less crude. A bleak fortress was set upon the fell. Its grey spires and red eyes were like the tombstone of a king, so tall and august, ever watched and lit by generations transient. Atop its walls, above the gate, a watcher gave a signal to the other troops that kept their hour. Their lord had returned. The knight upon the horse was slowing now his pace, and drew up to the winding path that clomb toward the entrance of the burg. The arching mouth of stone withdrew its teeth, unleashed its drawbridge tongue, and let its meal into its austere embrace, so that for but a while more the flickering winds would not yet weather it from mind and memory alike. Within the court the horse was reined in. The black-clad knight dropped from the beast, and left it to the deft stable hands, with a brief exchange of words and nods. Behind this knight the mouth into his fortress was drawn shut again, bound fast with iron and with oak. The knight was dressed as though for war. The well-fitted steel was pressed upon a darkly tanned leather, which in turn was framed by a lining of wolf's fur. From his saddle he had withdrawn his trusty blade, before the steed was taken from him by the servants. But even then it dangled narrowly from his belt, a dagger for times of hottest intimacy. Merely the master's head was not behelmed. It was shrouded with a heavy hood, which even now the man drew back to show his face like flint and bone. His eyes were cold as winter. His dark hair hung about his ears, and bearded with a squarish growth, the knight observed the courtyard wearily. His was a dangerous face that matched well the fur of wolves, from which it had now grimly sprouted, the crunching of his metal frame underlining every movement made with dreadful purpose. "Is all well, Wortmann?" asked he, when his horse had been taken to the stables and the marshal had emerged. "All is well," the marshal said and bowed. "And the weather, lord?" "Splendid," said the knight, yet no splendor was in the lines about his eyes. The lines were hard as calluses, in fact, much resembling the cliffs that foaming breakers were battering below. "The wolves are still too many. If their numbers do not diminish, the merchants shall never pass through these lands again." "Well, lord, banditry was never your first vocation," said Wortmann. "No," said the knight. "But you are idling, Wortmann. Something more has happened here of which you leave me ignorant." The marshal grimaced and said, "There is a man of God in the hall, lord." The knight in black looked at his marshal without a movement in his face. He sought only to drain whatever knowledge he might drink from the countenance of the other. "How did he enter?" asked the lord finally. "That is a mystery to us as well, lord. He says he walked in," explained Wortmann carefully, turning to look in the direction of the main entrance to the dining hall. "And my son?" asked the knight.
"He and the Lady Edith are entertaining the guests, lord,"
said the marshal. "Thank you, Owen," said the knight, and began to stride toward the towering portal of the dining hall. "Send for Alfred. His work with the manuscripts must be delayed yet again, I'm afraid." Owen bowed, turned, and was swallowed by the shadows of the many stairs and passageways that led into the heart of Duncrag Keep. Yes, that was its name. The Hall of Grey Fells, some others called it once. It was upon a Christmas Eve, which never merited mention in the house of Duncrag before, but never more would be forgot hereafter. The narrow doors into the dining hall shuddered heavily and yawned on iron hinges, as Duncrag's lord pressed against them with the might of his broad gauntlets. Then the doors gave way to their master, casting down weak motes of dust in dying daylight, revealing the brazier that dimly lit the entrance hall beyond. There stood also the tarnished remnant of an ancient heirloom to this obscure house upon the strand. It stood in the very middle of the room, an effigy of idol. It was the image of a long-defeated god. This was the blackened wooden remnant of ancient Irminsul. All about the walls of this heathen hall were painted, as with the blood of broken hearts, the tales of the fathers of Duncrag House, and how this relic had wandered from its ancient homeland hither over heights and deeps. Before this polished piece of wood Lord Duncrag bowed, laid his talons on his fluted breastplate, and said, "Thrumkuning, hall ebiode, Yermin." Then he passed the image by, and entered into the hall, whence roast meat's messenger was drifting on the air invitingly. Behind him a servant closed the doors, then vanished into the shadows of a passageway again. The long table in the middle of the hall was richly set with a decorated venison roast, with bread and butter, and much beer. And at the far end, near the hearth, sat his beloved wife and their son, who laughed at something recently said by a stranger, not old, who wore the colours of the church, black, as was the knight's own preference, but the master of the house shuddered at the thought of similarity. "I am glad to see you laughing, my boy," exclaimed the Black Knight to his son. "This man is some kind of fool or jester to enter here without leave of the lord of these high halls." He had said it with a playful tone, yet never did the gravity escape him. This playfulness betrayed the violence in his heart. The boy, still bearing laughter in his eyes, now turned to follow his father with his sprightly gaze. The blue eyes widened as they saw the brutal armor with which his father's mighty form was framed. "Sinewolf," said the knight's wife, and rose from her chair, intending to meet her husband with an embrace, though she thought better of it when they stood a face of one another. Instead, she laid her hands against his breast and pushed against the hardened steel somewhat. "So cold and cruel a greeting outstrips your prior insults to me by a mile." "I do try to keep you off me, my heart, but the colder my exterior, the hotter your flame seems to burn against me. Soon not even steel will keep me safe, I fear," said her man. "But what will keep me safe from you, I wonder?" she sighed. There was no winning here. They both then turned to observe their unexpected guest. "This is Winfred," explained the lady of the house, indicating the man of the cloth. "He says that he is looking for the Lord Duncrag. I have not seen the Lord all day, however," said she, "so I have told him that there isn't much hope for that." "Knock and the door shall be opened, says your holy book, priest," Sinewolf began, ever steady in his gaze, ever seeking out the flaws in the folds of his opponent's mien. "But you did not knock." "It seems, Lord, that one knocked before I came, for I found the doors swung wide, as though inviting me in. None hindered my passage. 3 hours I sat in the courtyard before a soul spoke to me, and then, when they wanted to show me out, they saw that the gates were fast shut, and that perhaps you would be interested in hearing what I've come to say," said Winfred of the cloth. "Then speak, and I will judge. But I will judge while eating if you will join me," said the Lord. "Might I say a word of thanks for the meal?" asked the priest.
"You are welcome to the meal, thankful or no. Hospitality is a custom of my father's,"
said Sinowolf, betraying a slight irritation.
"I mean, give thanks to him that brings forth all fruit from the earth,"
said the priest, with the same smile that never seemed to tire on his rosy face.
"In my lands, that is not the same God as in yours, Christian,"
said Sinowolf with a sigh, and sat down between his son and wife.
"No, indeed. As I wandered the circumference of your country, I saw that it is truly barren, beset by wolves and bears and even more dreadful things in summer, where the blood of monsters runs less cold," said the priest. "I will have no prayer in this hall, other than to Wortmann, the father that begat my race. If you must pray, do so silently. I have cut tongues from mouths before,"
growled Sinowolf then, his metal talons laid open upon the table as though to emphasize their capacity for putting words to work. The smile did not fade from Winfried's lips, it simply deepened and became sad.
"From the mouths of wolves alone, I hope,"
said he. "And from Ethelred," said the boy of a sudden, looking cheerily at the priest.
"Ethelred is your pet hound?"
asked the priest. Now his smile had faded.
"If dogs could speak, it would be equally as useless. I should have simply taken his head,"
said the Black Knight. "His head he lost soon enough as is," said the lady, who had lost the merry glow that had pronounced her youthful beauty upon her lord's entrance. She began to eat with sullen listlessness.
"Heavenly Father, bless this food and this family."
The priest began to pray in earnest. Sinowolf stared with growing resentment at the man of the cloth, at his audacity. He was not surprised that he had suddenly begun to pray to his God, but disgusted. He rose and marched with heavy step toward the man, grasped him by the collar of his garb, and dragged him, still babbling, from his bench. Without hesitation, which betrayed his close kinship with well-trained violence, Sinowolf, the Black Knight of Duncrag, kicked back the heavy doors of oak, and cast Winfried of the Church of Christ out into his courtyard. There the priest sprawled over the snowy flagstones for a brief moment. Then he recovered and stood up, brushing the powder from his robes. The smile had fled back into his face, though it was now telling of an emotion that was altogether foreign to those that looked on.
"I banish you, Winfried, from my lands. You were untouched by wolves and bears heretofore. May your God continue to preserve you, if that is his will. Though if he hears the prayers of strangers, let him make of you a filling meal for those beasts beyond my gate, if it should cost me 100 men to kill them thereafter."
Sinowolf cursed. Then the Lord of Duncrag turned and entered once more the place where Irmin Sul's remains were cradled in the antechamber. To this fragment he said,
"Irmin, hear me. Do what I have asked, should this man's God be lesser than you."
Then Sinowolf walked in again to his high hall, in which his son and wife did feed on the fruits of his labour, and yet the fruit was hard won. Scarce the deer of this land were grown, and all the talk of wolves that brought this fact to settle with grave consequence upon the Black Knight's soul. The wolves were too many, and they were far more dangerous to hunt for meat that was itself not good for eating. Finally he removed his gauntlets from his hands. His wife arose at once to help him in removing the greater part of his armor, so that he might eat with them more comfortably. They sat down again in solemn silence, and now the Lord of Duncrag also tore the meat from a bone he took to hand. All the while their son's eyes grew vacant, wandering far away through thoughts and visions of a world that was so very different to the one he had grown up in and been imprisoned by. "What did the man do wrong, Papa?" asked the boy of a sudden. Sinowolf was stunned. A cold dread gripped his very middle, and the food turned to ash in his mouth.
"You pity him? Perhaps I grew too angry with him, my boy," he said after regathering himself. "But a lord should not be disobeyed in his own home, not even by a guest, least of all after an explicit command. You would do well to do the same when you are lord here, Sinnerweird.
In silence they ate on a while. Sinnerwolf drank deeply from his stein, distracted once more by the bitter pains of the futures he saw darkly unfolding on the horizon of his fortune. His hungry body drove the machinery of his limbs to administer his mouth with steaming nourishment, and then a foreign mouth did speak. A voice that none of those about the table knew said,
"Are you lord in this house?"
The Lady Edith sat up in her chair and looked about with a start. Sinnerwolf also looked about, but no body was seen anywhere to give rise to such a sound.
"Who asks?"
bade Sinnerwolf know, and rising reached out and took up his glinting blade.
"Who speaks without a tongue? Is it the lingering spirit of Athel Reed?"
First a second silence benighted them. Then booming laughter, as though that of the stones themselves, thundered on the very air.
"You may call me so, for as a king, and to the kings of this world, have I oft give counsel," said this voice. "Show yourself,"
demanded the Lord of Duncrag.
"Who are you?"
Suddenly, in the middle of the hall, above the narrow table, a flash as that of lightning painted white the dimness of the room. Then, as though climbing from beyond a veil, strode a form with wings upon its helm, upon its shoulders, and upon its booted heels. Brightly did its fearsome armor glint and bend to house its divine wearer, and to make of this high being the very stuff of beautiful horror. Like some angel of burning metal, there stood a god upon the table, and the wooden board buckled and gave way beneath the winged boots of this deity, withered as with age and broken. The little family of three scattered back a ways.
"You would give 100 men as an offering to a god foreign, Sinnerwolf, son of Sinnerbeorn?"
demanded this dreadful power in the middle of the hall. It wrapped itself in the twining smokes that now began to pour out from the hearth of glimmering coals at their back. The blade that Sinnerwolf held tilted somewhat to the floor as the weather-beaten warrior dropped onto his knees. His eyes grew wide with wonder and dread.
"Irmine,"
whispered he in horror and in awe.
"O Lord of Heaven, what have I done to call you here into my lowly hall? I see now that my anger was too quick, and that I spoke too hastily." "You spoke, Sinnerwolf, and I have heard,"
said the voice, as though cinders burned with its resonance upon the very air.
"But I will offer you a just reward for all the loyalty you've shown. Instead of 100, I shall take but 1 man from you, and make of the priest an example of my power. Through his death you shall be set free from toiling here in desert corners of the world. Men shall know the name of Duncrag yet again, and shall bow before you, ere than to the Emperor himself. For what emperor, I pray you, could stand before my glory?"
At this, the light that had before seemed only a reflection on the polished metal of the strange apparition's frame now seared itself into their eyes with ardent jealousy, and grew to be the stuff of summer sun. Its heat outstripped the hearths. Edith had run to hold her child against her breast as pulsing waves of wind buffeted him there. The boy stared without a word at the sleepless dream. The wings of the high being bent and stretched and seemed to grow, to reach up to the rafters far above, brightening from raven's black to seagull's white with every passing moment as they did so, until it seemed that truly Apollo himself stood before them. As he cowered on the floor, racked with doubts regarding all he knew and wanted, Sinnerwolf begged his heavenly messenger, saying,
"What are you, Lord? For you are not what I had thought." "You called me Irmine, and so I have been known by your fathers, yet others named me Jormungr, Odin, Wotan, I wrought a dreadful work amid my wolves here in the darkness. You, my Saxon children, and those in other lands. In Rome they named me Mercury. In Greece I was called Hermes. They thought I was but a messenger, yet the work of my hands became their dearest treasure. For I deal in bending words, and through words the minds of men. And now I will bend your mind and memory to observe my purpose once again, Sinewolf, regal child of my cunning. I will take one man from you, and do for this price what you have bidden of me, and so much more.
What man, great power? Cried Sinewolf.
Your son.
The scream that issued from the throat of Edith then was like the rending of the heavens, but it made no impression on the gleaming giant in the middle of the hall. In this moment memories and images passed before the eyes of the high hall's lord, and he swiped at the air before himself, trying to clear them from his mind. He saw suddenly the ringing steeples of the towns and villages to which his duties had taken him, before he had fallen to banditry. He saw the priest, Winfrid, whom he had cast out. Winfrid? Why did he think of him? What had come upon him now that he thought of the enemy? Was it that cunning man's conjury that sprouted from his table? No. This was an honour to his fathers. None of them had been so worthy as to draw the gaze of immortal Irmin unto themselves. Unsteadily Sinewolf arose, and marched toward his son. His claw reached out and gripped the slender arm of the boy, whose mother, weeping, held him fast a brief while, staring with a plea unlike any the Black Knight had ever witnessed. He had seen much bleeding. The villages that remained in smouldering ruins at his back in memory now turned as if upon a wheel to stand before his inner eye again, and he froze. Within him something gnawed and ate away the manliness that he had spent the decades past refining. He looked upon his son and found himself a child in spirit. The child he had thought forgotten. He looked upon the ancient deity and knew no awe, only terror, blind terror. And then he noticed also that the sword which a moment prior he had held lay where he had left it on the floor some paces away. A pretty thing, the way it caught the light. It was now like a specimen of flower to his nearly broken mind. It had no function here. What were the implements of a gardener in the face of war? He looked again at Edith's tear-riven face. They had been wedded in a church with ringing bells not long ago.
The child belongs to me,
the fiery god declared.
It does not,
an elder voice cried from the entrance to the hall.
Alfred?
Gasped Sinewolf, past tears he had not noticed. The steward of Duncrag had come down from the tower, in which he worked with ancient parchments most of his days. At his back stood sheepish Winfrid, with that enigmatic smile.
Who dares intrude upon my covenant?
The winged god of Greyfells demanded.
Begone, spirit, you have no power here,
said Alfred's steward from the doorway. Then he looked over his shoulder with a second thought, now back into the hall again.
I forget my place,
he muttered through his beard. Then it was Winfrid who strode into the room, and already the great wings seemed to shrink like candles under flames. The boy is baptized in the name of another, wherefore you have no claim on him, said Winfrid.
I am the god of this house. I am the god of his fathers. He is mine.
The glowing being then returned, but it shrank before the man in robes that so resembled Sinewolf's own black garb. You are cast out, fell spirit, cried Winfrid, with a strange contortion of his childlike face. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, I command you, as a called and ordained servant of the Lord, depart from this abode, and never return. This place is sanctified to the Lord, and to his holy purposes now.
Baptized,
whispered Sinewolf in surprise. He turned to Edith then. Turmoil raged within his breast. What could this all mean? His family had wrestled with great difficulty the right to stay unbaptized without having to suffer the consequences.
Edith, you have betrayed me.
My lord, she cried, and crept up to his knee. If this is betrayal, I know it not.
Lord, you call me lord,
repeated Cinewolf between heavy breaths. Then he bellowed,
You have betrayed me. Where now is my garden tool?
Papa, no, cried his desperate son, cleaving to his arm.
And you as well have fallen into the clutches of these Christians with their lies,
shouted the Black Knight. He cast the boy onto the flagstones at his steely boots, as though he were no more than soiled clothes.
If you have indeed been stolen from me by this wench, what are you to me any more, if not dead?
But the last words only left him weakly.
He is mine,
rumbled the voice upon the burning air. I could not take the horrid dreams any longer, my lord. Cinewolf, please, his wife cried out. As the knight beheld her, all composure having flown from him as from a punctured kettle, the words of Alfred came across the hall.
It was I that counselled her in this, lord.
Slowly the knight turned to face the once most trusted servant of his house. What was he now become? The greatest of all traitors, a Judas, fitting for their Christian God.
Lord Duncrag,
the strange man, Winfrid, then called out, drawing Cinewolf's hateful stare unto himself. Behold, the so-called God of your fathers. He has no power here. The blood relations of a greater God are present, and these he cannot touch. That boy does not belong to him.
These are my blood relations,
exclaimed the Lord of Duncrag Hall,
and you have turned them against me.
The waters that rebirthed them are thicker than your blood, Lord, the priest contradicted. They are children of the Most High God now.
How dare you, churl?
Bellowed Cinewolf.
What are you but a fool and a player in garbs too solemn for your tenor? I will paint them red with your blood. Then speak to me of blood's consistency. This boy belongs to Ermain, as have all the children of Duncrag.
The knight in black strode to take again the fallen blade into his hands. Turning to face the spirit of the house, Winfrid cried, In the name of Jesus Christ, who lives and reigns, a man above all spirits, be gone from this place, you devil. And indeed, the diminishing deity flickered and went out like a candle snuffed. With bold resolve, the priest stepped into the way between Cinewolf and his son. The wrath knight held his sword in hand again, glaring with intense vengeance at the weakling who barred his path.
Lord Cinewolf,
said Alfred's steward, also drawing near,
it is I whom you must slay, if you seek blood. I will,
said Cinewolf, turning with feral precision to face his steward, spitting the words through bared teeth.
But you will witness first the consequences of your hypocrisy. Lord, what will become of you if you do this? It would mean the end of your house,
Alfred begged.
If I live, the house of my fathers lives on with me,
said the knight with vehemence.
A rough life I do not fear. This manner of life, a life of lies as you have all turned out to me, I cannot bear.
My Cinewolf, sobbed Lady Edith tearily, arose and went to embrace her man. He stepped back from her, raising the blade. He was a master with a weapon, and would not cut her, but he thrust her back with it at first, then with his arms. She would not find a hold on him. She found a hold on him. She held him firmly, racked with tears. I could not suffer any longer those dreams. I could not bear the voices in these halls, and always our child was at risk. I had to seek out help, and you were oft away, or would not hear of it. I could not do otherwise. If you must slay me, but were I not to have done this thing, you would have mourned for a corpse, instead of hating it. I thought you would be glad to keep me by your side, but if I was wrong, then I want no further part of this life anyhow. The intensity of her weeping had now drowned the words in her throat. and it was all she could do to cleave to the knight in black and wait for his judgment. The judgment was slow in coming. The Black Knight's eyes wandered from the shuddering waterworks at his breast to the wailing child on the floor. Why must all that he had held dear be turned against him?
"Where is your god then, Winfred?"
sighed Cinewolf after a long while.
"He is here,"
said Winfred.
"He has moved your heart to mercy. Mercy is his work, and through it he heals the things that such fallen gods as Eamon wound. Is this why you have come? To finish what big Charles of Francia began? To finally put an end to the ways of my fathers?"
asked the knight irreverently.
"I am a servant,"
said Winfred.
"I do what I am commanded, nothing less. I am not to stand in the way of you honouring your fathers. But it was not Eamon that begat your race, Lord. Eamon held your people prisoner, like wolves in a kennel. And so your fathers, just as mine, as did all the fathers of men, walked in captivity as slaves beneath the cruel bonds of devils. But their bonds have been cast off. The right that was given the old gods to rule has been made void by the law of blood, which the King of Heaven has paid. In the records of my parish I found the name of your son, Lord. I wanted to meet with him, to see how he was being raised. It is what I am called to, Lord."
Cinewolf turned his face away from the priest and gazed a long while into the fire. His son had ceased weeping now, intently listening to what passed between the men. The woman had also grown calmer, though she held him no less close. Finally he said,
"Then tell me of this King of Heaven, before whose least impressive servants even the most dreadful gods would flee like fortune from my lands."
Alfred Stewart sighed and collapsed into the near chair, cursing under his breath, and rubbing his face with both of his gnarled hands, relieved. A moment later the chair broke under his weight, and he cursed again, tumbling backwards over the stone-laid floor. Winfred, however, looked somewhat distressed, neared the family by the fireplace, and said,
"I will begin, I think, with the story that the church remembers on this night. It is a story that initiates the victory which you have witnessed this evening. Yes, but I will begin with the gospel of how this King of Heaven sent his Son into the world to save us men from the darkness by himself becoming a man, elevating our nature once and for all